And to do that, I want to tell you the story of Jack. This is a very abridged version of the story of Jack. Jack is a 6-year-old in care. He's been with his current carers for 4 years, and they are his proposed adoptive parents. He's had a complex history, which I won't go into, but he's made very good progress with his proposed adoptive parents. He has contact with his birth parents 4 times a year, and that's not always a positive experience. He's rude to his birth father, he practically ignores his birth mother, and his behaviour deteriorates after contact. The proposed adoptive parents support as much contact as Jack wants. Their priority is basically Jack's wishes. They bring him to contact, but they don't address his behaviour or his attitude towards the birth parents. And they've asked for a provision in the adoption plan which says that contact will only occur with Jack's agreement. The birth parents oppose the adoption, so we're before the Supreme Court with a contested adoption application. So what are the main issues for the court to consider? First, whether adoption would promote the child's best interests and is clearly preferable to any other order that could be made. Second, whether the consent of the birth parents should be dispensed with. And third, whether the arrangements proposed for birth parent contact are proper in the circumstances. The most relevant of these issues in Jack's story is the third, birth parent contact, and that's what I want to focus on today. So let's look at what the court actually said about birth parent contact in Jack's case. The court said that it had concerns about whether in the face of opposition from the child, the birth parents would be able to instill a positive attitude in him towards birth family contact. The court also expressed concern that the proposed adoptive parents did not reprimand the child for his disrespectful behaviour towards his birth father, and nor did they encourage the child to appropriately engage with his birth mother. The court emphasised the importance of the proposed adoptive parents being proactive and firmly encouraging the child to interact with and respect his birth parents. The court, in the end, relied on other evidence that the proposed adoptive parents did discuss the child's family history with him in a respectful manner, and they also encouraged him to accept his birth parents as a significant part of his life. So there was a culture of openness within the family, and ultimately the court found that they had demonstrated a capacity to support birth family contact. In relation to the adoption plan, the court found that the provision that contact only occur with Jack's agreement was effectively giving Jack the power to veto contact. And the court found that it wasn't appropriate to give a 6-year-old the ability to veto contact. And I think that touches on what Mark was talking about the court has to hold in balance the best interest of the child now and in the future, and sometimes a 6-year-old isn't the best judge of what is going to be in his best interest in the future. Ultimately, the court made the adoption order, but it didn't approve the adoption plan, and it made contact orders under the Family Law Act. So what does this mean for us and open adoption? Openness is more than a child understanding that he or she is adopted, and openness is more than removing the secrecy that has characterised past adoption practices. Openness is attitudinal. The Supreme Court expects birth parents to proactively support birth family contact. It's not enough to support it in principle. The court expects proposed adoptive parents to encourage their child to engage meaningfully in birth family contact even when the child doesn't want to. In fact, especially when the child doesn't want to. So what can we take away from Jack's story? Well, I think that obviously every case is different, and the court is going to take a different approach to a different set of circumstances. But I think we can say that this is generally representative in most cases of the court's view on birth family contact.
I think historically, if you think about open adoption, people say, if you asked anyone in the community, they would say, oh, that means you see the birth parent. In fact, you might express open adoption through birth parent contact, but in some cases it's neither possible nor desirable, and that is actually, I think, a fact. So for me, it's an attitude that I look for in care of families, which says, you're part of my family, and therefore your family is part of my family. It's an attitude that looks beyond the reasons for removal, that looks at not what you did wrong, but what you can now do. I think it's an attitude that actually says that life story work, and I've looked at a lot of life stories, guys, is not 4 contacts a year, a whole lot of awards and photos, and a few grainy photographs from contact visits. It's not. Life story work is a narrative about why this little person is with us and lives with us and needs to live with us, and what happened to them and why, and how you come to understand that and build that as who you are without personalising it and without demonising the people who did it to you. That's what life story work is to me. I've been thinking about openness, for me as a practitioner. And I think that it's really important that we own our own stuff about adoption, about how we feel about it. And if you are a practitioner in the field like me, then what you work with a lot of time is the raw pain of people involved, of children, of birth families, and of carer families, and how do you, in the midst of all that, work out what's right for a child? Open adoption should never be prescriptive in terms of contact or any kind of arrangement. So what will suit one family and one child at one time in their life will not suit another child. But if they are living with a family that, with a 6-year-old who doesn't want to, frankly, if he doesn't want to go and it's bad for him, I probably wouldn't make him go, but I'd make the parents go and say, I'm not bringing Jack because he's in a bit of a state, but I want to see you, and tell Jack that I'm going because it's really important that I keep in touch with your mum and dad. I mean, there's lots of ways you can do it and not be prescriptive. And when you're in my game, lots of people say, that means 4 times a year in the school holidays. Well, maybe, but maybe not. There are lots of different ways. And with the opening up of opportunities for social media, etc., we've got lots of ways we can stay in touch.
And certainly when looking at the body of international research, it's clearly identified that adoption provides far greater outcomes and lifelong outcomes for children when compared to the cohort of children who remain in out-of-home care. I think adoption will provide children, as research has shown, greater stability, greater sense of belonging, and long-term security. It's about providing a child with a family for life, as opposed to carers until they're aged 18. If adoption is identified as a care plan for a child, then these discussions must occur with the birth family members as soon as possible. Certainly within Bernardos' practice, we actively encourage staff to be making those discussions from the first day we meet a parent, if that is what the care plan is for a child. Yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, parents are not going to like to hear the word adoption. It is going to be upsetting. It is going to be confronting. However, parents will appreciate the fact that you have been honest and open and transparent with them about what the goal is for their child. Parents are also going to need to have time to come to the terms with the fact that adoption is being considered for their child. It's a really difficult situation for parents to find themselves in. Birth family members also need to be provided with accurate information about what open adoption means in today's context. Unfortunately, there's still a legacy of past forced adoption practice that has left a lot of myth and misunderstanding about how open adoption works today. Many times birth parents have said to me personally, but we don't want our child to be adopted because we still want to be able to see them. They don't understand always that open adoption means there will be ongoing contact, and not just face-to-face contact, but the child is going to grow up with full understanding of their biological identity, their adoptive identity, and that opportunity for ongoing contact with birth family members. Prospective adoptive parents and birth family members also need to have time to develop a working relationship with one another. Again, that's another challenge. It's not always going to be easy, and in some cases, in some circumstances, it may not be possible. However, attempts need to be made to give the best opportunity for the birth family and the adoptive family to be able to work together. It's absolutely crucial for children to be able to grow up and see both their sets of parents being able to communicate with one another and hopefully be respectful to one another. What practitioners can do is by introducing the adoptive family and the birth family members as early as possible, and then actively support both of the families to work together to facilitate contact without the agency's involvement as early as possible. It does allow the opportunity for those relationships to develop over time.
So for me, being open to out-of-home co-adoption, in my practice is, I think, are really about being open to new possibilities and new ways of working. We are unfortunately, in a system that we are very time poor. We are very overloaded. We're very busy, and I don't think our system does prioritise that sort of creative way of working. We often don't have time to try new things, and creative casework isn't necessarily valued because it takes time, and we don't have it. So, but I think if you sort of flip it on the other side and you look at adoption, adoption gives us that opportunity to take that time, because the law requires us to do so. The law requires us to find out the birth parents' views on adoption. We need to know, that they know about it. We need to demonstrate that they know about it. We need to know what they think about it, and we need to know what they think about contact. So, because we have that legal obligation, I would argue we also have a moral obligation. We do have to try and find them. And how do we find them when they've been, disengaged, or they've been deemed impossible to find, or they don't want to engage, or they're too difficult to engage? So I think being open is actually just being open to trying to find them, even if you've inherited a case that, where it seems like it's impossible. And then once you are starting that process, I guess being open to all the possibilities that actually comes with it. So I think we unfortunately tend to do a lot of casework by assumption, and I'm guilty as well. So for example, you will inherit a case, both parents been described as threatening or abusive or difficult or challenging. They're not able to be engaged because letters have been sent, they've never responded, or they've been rung and they've never rung back, and there's that inherent assumption that they're not interested in their child, or that they don't want to see their child, or they don't want to have any contact, and I think this goes on and on and on for several years until sometimes then adoption comes in and we start to look at that again. So I think being open to adoption can also just mean being open to other hypotheses or alternative understandings of that birth parent, rather than that sort of status quo. So I guess the other point I want to make is about being open to out-of-home co-adoption. I think is also about taking that extra step, particularly in regards to search action. So, when we are talking about difficult to find parents, what are we actually doing? And, for me, I really cast the net as wide as I can and try to gather as much information as possible, not just because I'm trying to find them, but because also, when you can gather more information that informs life story, which informs all the other parts of this child's life that might have nothing to do with adoption. At the end of the day, even if that child's not adopted, this is still information or connections or relationships that are important to that child. And then I guess, just touching on the other points around life story work, but also, being open to the fact that adoption may not actually be the right outcome in the end. And I don't mean that to sound anti-adoption. I sort of just mean to say that when you're a frontline staff member and you have this little family you're working with, it's so hard to know if that's the right outcome. And I think that you can be afraid to make a decision about adoption because you don't know, and it's and I guess it's that danger of spending so much time trying to gather that evidence versus that child staying in care. So but if you're constantly evaluating things, so just like family preservation or restoration, you should feel confident that whatever case plan goal that child has is actually the right case plan goal for the child. And it's the same for adoption. Once adoption's been on the radar, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider whether guardianship is more appropriate or an alternative order. And as long as you can keep answering the question that yes, adoption is going to be the best outcome for this child, then absolutely proceed. But to not ask yourself that question, I think, is actually a bit of a danger, and that actually isn't helpful either.